story begins in 2004, when I was 9 years old. My mom sadly passed giving birth to my little brother, who also passed due to the lack of tools, since that part of India is very poor and has a high population of uneducated people. When they tried to take him out, they pulled off his hand. She technically gave birth to a hand, like Mae Young, and that will always hurt me, because expecting to be a big brother and hearing this news changes you as a person. And this is relevant and will play a big factor in the story. When my mom passed, my father had to work 2 jobs. He'd arrive home at 4 a.m. every night. Indian culture is different to American culture, in the sense that leaving a 9-year-old at home alone while you work is perfectly normal. I'd play with my WWE action figures and play matches like The Undertaker vs. Chris Lee, right in the middle of the house. In this part of India, the village was small, and everyone knew and truly loved each other. This meant the fact that windows without windows, if that makes sense, were normal. Basically, there would be square holes in the walls of the very old clay houses, but no windows in them. Me being the careless 9-year-old I was, I played with my wrestling toys in front of the biggest windowless hole in the house. I also had no bedtime, since my dad would be home at 4 a.m., and my 9-year-old self couldn't stay up that late. I usually slept at around 1 a.m. at the latest. I met a kid at school named Daoud, who was new to the village, and who too was a wrestling fan. I decided to let him into my home and play with me. It felt great to have company for once. The thing about Daoud is, he brought bad vibes, in that his father was a heavy drinker. He was unemployed, looked very unkempt, almost like a homeless man, and had been arrested multiple times. He would drop Daoud off, and would always give me a look that gave me chills. Another fun fact about me, despite living in India, English is my first language, and at the time I spoke somewhat decent Urdu. Daoud's father, who we will call Harper, due to the fact that he had long black hair and a long black beard, was originally from another part of India and spoke Hindi. The only English word he knew was yeah, and would always say, yeah, around me. He clearly was on something. Anyway, in the village, people will send around papers talking about the news in the village. Almost always it was good news, because we were a very peaceful community. But there was always a bad apple here and there. It being a part of my school curriculum to read these papers forced me to check into the status on the village regularly. The one that got me was the one on laptops. This was the year laptops were huge, especially in a poor area like India. Harper was a computer handler. His specialty was fixing Dells. I did not know this at the time, so reading about people taking their laptops in for fixing and finding files of gore, porn, which was also illegal at the time, and other horrific stuff, was more interesting than scary. There only being one computer fixing store in the area, let everyone point their fingers at Harper for the man being behind the act. But because there wasn't strong proof, they couldn't do anything about it. One day Daoud came over, and so did Harper. Usually when Harper drops off Daoud, he would walk around the village and find something to do. That day he decided to crouch down along the side of the house and watch us. I put mattresses and blankets on the floor, and Daoud and I had pro wrestling matches. It was really fun. Daoud kept telling me that his dad wouldn't approve of it, but I told him that we would put everything away an hour before he was supposed to be back. I had Daoud on my shoulders when Harper jumped into my house. I put Daoud down and was scared for my life. He stared at me with his huge dark eyes and slapped me in the face hard enough to the point that I tasted blood. I cried, and he dragged Daoud out of my house. Daoud would come over less and less, and the part that got to me was that when I'd see him at school, he'd have bruises on his arms and face. It hurt me knowing that my poor decisions did this to him. I never told my dad what happened, because I wasn't supposed to have anyone over in the first place. One night, I woke up in pitch black to a noise. I tried to brush it off as stray goats or cows walking by, but I heard it again. It sounded like footsteps. I jumped out of bed and laid my skinny frame under it. I saw a light shining in the direction to my part of the house where I was. What I saw next made my blood turn cold. I saw 2 feet walking, and swaying right next to them was a machete. I laid there, almost in tears, but the feet walked past and into another part of the house. My father, who blasted music on his radio on his scooter, scared off the intruder when he was coming home from work, and the feet ran past my eyes, and I heard it jump into the backyard. It never felt so good to hear Punjabi MC in my life. I memorized the black boots with orange decals on it, trying to think of who it was. I went back onto my bed and pretended to sleep so my dad wouldn't flip out on me. The next day at school, I noticed that Daoud wasn't talking to anyone, not even me. When it came time to leave, he had the worst look on his face, knowing that he had to go home back to Harper. I walked with him and saw Harper standing at the front of the school. I looked down to avoid eye contact and saw something that literally almost made me shit myself. Black boots with orange decals. I looked up and he was staring right at me. I knew my life was on the line with this guy, so I had to act smart. Although I was 9 and had the mindset to match, when I'm scared and need to think of a quick solution, I turn into Albert Einstein and Damien Sindeau's love child. I said to Daoud, "See you at my mom's place. She lives 3 houses down from mine." The next day, Daoud wasn't at school. That continued for the whole week. When we got the newspaper and I read through it, I almost threw up. A man was slashed in the arm with a machete, and the machete-wielding man was arrested. The man lived, you guessed it, 3 houses down from mine, and the arrested man was Harper. When they searched his house, they found a variety of weird and disturbing things. Many are things I won't get into, but there were some things in there that will always haunt me. The head of my Chris Jericho action figure, a file on his computer labeled "Yeah, yeah, yeah," with pictures of when Daoud and I played, along with pictures of me alone through the holes in my house. Pictures of me on the toilet from the window above my toilet, which meant that he must have stood on something and leaned over through the window to take, which fills me with fear knowing that if I would have looked up from the shitter, I would have seen those wide dark eyes staring down at me. My dad was alerted when these pictures were found of me, and it was the most embarrassing thing I'd ever been through. He saw pictures of me doing things I wasn't allowed to do, and cringy wrestling matches, my angry inch on the toilet, etc. As far as I know, Harper is still in jail due to the very harsh charges he faced. And do I feel bad for getting an innocent man's arm slashed? No. He sued Harper for money I can't disclose, but I can say that he doesn't have to work another day in his life again. Daoud and I reconnected over Facebook last year, and he seemed to get his life back together, and took his dad's job fixing Dells. I could have been killed that day by an Indian man, Jason Voorhees style. I deserve a way more stylish death. I'm a 14-year-old male. I was home alone one Saturday night, chilling in the living room and watching films, when all of a sudden I hear 3 or 4 loud, violent bangs on my front door. Then I heard the shouts and screams of 3 men saying, "Open the door, we'll break it in." I didn't know what to do, so I turned off the TV and ran upstairs with the landline and my mobile phone. I locked myself in my bedroom and hid underneath my bed. I still heard the banging from downstairs. I live in a quiet area with 4 other houses. The people living in one of the houses were on holiday, and the other 2 houses that people lived in were elderly and usually fast asleep. I called and told my mom everything. She said she'd be home as soon as possible and told me to call the police using the landline. So I did just that. I frantically dialed 999 for the police and calmly told the dispatcher what was going on. She said she would send 2 police cars to my house, but it'll take 15 minutes for the police to arrive. I told my mom to stay calm because the police were on their way, but she sped her way home, not caring about anything except me. My mom was at work, which was 1 hour away from the house. All of a sudden, the house was filled with absolute quiet. I was quiet as well, and the 999 operator was still on the line with me asking if I was okay. Suddenly, I heard the loud sound of glass breaking from my kitchen. The intruders broke through my kitchen door. I told the operator and my mom what had just happened. My mom told me she was coming home as soon as possible, and that she didn't care if she ran the red lights. I asked the operator in a shaking voice, "Where's the police?" She told me to stay calm, and that the police were about 10 minutes away. I heard loud and heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. The 999 operator said to stay put, and the police are on their way. I told my mom, in a very quiet voice, and she told me she just got stopped by the police for passing 4 red traffic lights, and not to worry. I'm practically in tears now, and I hear the intruder saying, come out, wherever you are," in a really deep and scary voice. I told the operator what the intruder said, and the operator told me that the police are just 5 minutes away. The call with my mom got disconnected, so I couldn't relay the information. I heard the intruders banging on the doors and thrashing every room in the house. A chill ran up my spine when they came to my bedroom door and started to say my name. "Arif, Arif, Arif, come out." I quietly told the operator, and she said not to worry, that I should be able to hear the police sirens. I said yes, and was really happy to hear them. The operator told me to stay where I was. Then all of a sudden I hear a really big bang on my room door. One of the door hinges were broken off. Then by some miracle, I heard another really big bang at my front door, and I heard a police officer say, "Police, get downstairs with your hands up." The 3 men did just that. But one thing that will never leave me is I heard one of the men say to me, "Arif, you are really lucky. This time only though." I was frozen with fear, and the police officer told me my mom's here and it's safe for me to get out of the room. I was still on the phone with 999, so I thanked the operator and disconnected the call. In the end, I learned that there was actually 4 men in total. How did I hear 3? I learned a lot later what had happened. I came downstairs and hugged my mom tightly. Luckily, my mom explained to the traffic police everything, and the traffic police contacted the local police and asked them if my mom's story was true, and the local police corroborated that. The police then gave my mom a ride home with sirens on. I explained everything to the police, and the police told me that the 4 men had really bad records: rape, murder, kidnaps, and break-ins. And my mom knew one of the men as her boss in a previous job. My mom's previous job was in a nursery, and she told me that her boss was a really nice person. She also told her boss that she had only 1 child, which was me, and told him my name. However, one day in the nursery, my mom caught her boss touching one of the children. He was touching a 4-year-old toddler, and my mom immediately reported her boss, and he wasn't allowed to work with children anymore. My mom's boss then told my mom that he would get revenge, and he did as soon as he got out of prison. The 3 men came upstairs looking for me, while the 4th man was keeping a lookout downstairs. But when he heard the police sirens, he fled the house, not even warning the other 3 men that the police were there. What I found out later was the 4th man was actually a good person. He had a criminal file and was in prison for 4 years. Then he got released. The 4 men were all good friends, but little did the other 3 men know, their 4th friend was actually trying to get them caught. He also called 999 and told the operator everything. The 3 men were arrested, and my mom did press charges for breaking and entering into our house, and more charges were pressed, which I'm not really sure what they were. The 3 men are in prison for a long time. I don't know how long, but I know a very long time. We moved out 2 months after the incident to a somewhat safer neighborhood with more neighbors. This happened to me when I was 11 years old, and the year was 1994. the exact date actually being June 17, 1994. If that date sounds familiar, it was the day of the infamous O.J. Simpson car chase. I remember this day vividly, not only because of the O.J. Simpson drama, but for what happened to me and my two friends later in the evening. A little background on me. I am now 34 years old, and I am male. I grew up in the suburbs of Spokane, Washington. The neighborhood where I grew up was a typical middle-class all-American neighborhood. Constant barbecues, kids playing outside, neighbors waving, etc. This day, everything started pretty normal. I woke up, ate some breakfast, and started playing Super Nintendo. My best friends at the time lived across the street, brothers only 11 months apart in age. Evan, age 12, and Danny, age 11. We were as close as you could possibly be at 11 years old. We had been out of school for a week or two, and our days usually consisted of riding our bikes around the neighborhood, playing baseball, playing in the dirt, you know, the usual boy stuff. I would like to add that being an 11-year-old in the early to mid-90s was freaking awesome. I have 3 daughters now, and their idea of playing is going on their tablets and creating stop-motion videos for their heavily parental-monitored YouTube channels. I guess it's just different now, but I feel very blessed to have had my childhood in the 90s. Anyway, the usual knock on the door came at around 10 a.m., with Evan and Danny standing on my front porch. This day's fun was going to end early, as we were helping Evan and Danny's parents bale hay. They owned a small 7-acre farm, and where I grew up, it was not unusual to have neighbors right next to you that had a few acres and owned farm animals. At about 3 p.m., we were called to start helping with the baling of hay. The group helping was me, Evan, Danny, their mom and dad, their 2 uncles, and a local neighborhood teenager named Mike, who was like 16 or 17. I hated this dude. He was such a douchebag. He also didn't like me, because I was the only boy in the neighborhood who didn't worship the ground this punk walked on. The job took like 5 or 6 hours. I had so much fun, because I had to drive the truck where the bales of hay were being loaded, and I literally learned how to drive at 11 years old. It was so exciting, and I couldn't wait to go home and tell my parents, not only about me learning how to drive, but to also give my mom the $20 I had just earned, which at 11 years old in 1994 was a crap ton of money. I was home about 10 minutes when the home phone rang. My mom picked it up, and it was Danny, so she hands the phone to me. He says, "Hey, my parents ordered pizza and want to know if you want to come over and eat, then stay the night." I asked my mom, and she happily said yes, but first she stated that I needed to take a shower. After my shower, I headed over, and we all sat on the back deck eating pizza, drinking soda, and just having a great time. The adults began to open beers, and before long they were pretty tipsy. I think the time was around 10 or 11 when the adults decided they were going to walk to a local bar that is literally only like a block away. The bar is actually still there to this day, and it's on a corner of a semi-busy road. Kind of an unusual place for a bar, but it obviously serves a great purpose as a local watering hole. Being left alone for a few hours at this age was actually pretty normal. After we were done eating, Mike and the douchebag teenager excused himself, thanked Evan and Danny's parents for everything, and left. But before he left, Mike specifically looked at me and gave me this weird look. I remember thinking it was weird, but didn't say anything, because it was so abnormal I didn't really know how to explain it. Eventually the adults headed to the bar, and us 3 boys immediately went into Evan and Danny's dad's hidden stash of Penthouse magazines, grabbed a few of them, brought them downstairs, and started flipping through them. That's when it started. I had this feeling that we were being watched. I can't describe how I felt like I was being watched, but anyone who's felt it before knows it's like an ominous feeling, like a sixth sense unexplained by science. However, after looking at the large sliding glass door that led to the patio/backyard, I shrugged it off as nothing because I didn't see anything. A few minutes later, I noticed the family's dog's nose pressed against the glass, tail not wagging, and intensely looking for something outside. Then the dog started barking very defensively, and that's when the fear crept back into my mind. I said to my friends, "Dude, there's someone out there." They both looked at me and literally laughed, opened the sliding glass door, and pulled me outside. Nothing. Nothing was there, and once again the fear left me. We eventually returned the magazines where we got them from and settled in downstairs in the basement. We were all lying next to each other in sleeping bags and watching the news. The O.J. Simpson story was riveting. Yes, even to 3 boys. And I can remember specifically comprehending everything the news was reporting. After watching the news for about 10 through 15 minutes, the dog started barking again, this time more defensive than before. Evan got up with some frustration, grabbed the dog and locked her in the spare bedroom. I wasn't really that startled, but I do remember thinking that this dog being a German Shepherd would be useful in the case that someone was outside. We turned off the lights, with the TV now being the only light, and within minutes we were all out like a light. The earlier day's work and the toll it took on our little bodies seemed to finally catch up. I woke up after being passed out for like 10 minutes, then turned off the TV, flipped over to my back, and that's when I saw him. A silhouette of a hooded person crouched and kneeled behind a patio chair, approximately 2 feet away from the sliding glass door, just looking in the window at us. The feeling of having the hair on the back of your neck stand up is probably one of the most unforgettable sensations a human being can feel. I just sat there, paralyzed with fear. I couldn't do or say anything. My heart was racing uncontrollably. I felt tears running down my face. I was literally frozen in fear. About this time is when I noticed that the sliding glass door was not even locked. I was so scared. After just lying there for a few minutes looking at this person, I began to pray that everything would be okay. Right then, that's when I noticed a motion coming from his right arm, which in the midst of my fear I remember thinking, what the hell is he doing? Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this perv was jerking off, but I was too young to comprehend what he was doing. After a few minutes he stopped and started inching his way closer to the sliding glass door and cupped his hands against the window to peer in. That's when I panicked and rolled over and put my pillow over my head. Being 11 years old, I honestly didn't know what to do. I heard the sliding glass door begin to open. Then, the noise of someone running away. Then I heard the best noise I've ever heard in my life. The adults returning home from the bar. They must have scared off the perv from outside. That's when I ran upstairs, and in a fit of tears and hysteria I tried my best to explain what had happened. Only one adult, one of my uncles, actually took me serious and went out to the backyard to investigate. He, of course, found nothing, so the cops were never called. My parents also never took me seriously, but did advise me to take better precaution locking the doors in the future. This was never taken serious by my 2 friends either. It was chalked up to my imagination. But I know what I saw. I actually used to get made fun of quite a bit leading into my teen years because of this. But whatever or whoever I saw left a huge impression on me. I obsess over locking my doors at all times, and I make sure the blinds are closed at night. Oh, one more thing. Mike, the older male teenager I hated, was later accused and convicted of molesting boys in the neighborhood as young as 4 years old. He was finally caught not too long after this, and since he was a minor, I'm not sure what happened or how he was punished. I just know that my parents sat me down one time telling me to stay away from him, and if he ever tried to hang out with me, to immediately run home. He moved away not too long after that, and that was the last I ever heard from him. I don't remember his last name, and I couldn't find anything on the internet corroborating this story. So, if you don't believe me, I don't know what to tell you. I don't actually know 100% that it was Mike, but come on, it most likely was, right? I live in the UK, in a fairly decent area with low crime rates. My parents recently separated, and were getting divorced at the time of this story. This happened 4 years ago. One night, I was just home with my dad and my dog. My mom was out, and my parents still shared the house they bought 3 years prior. On this night, it was a normal Saturday, and I went to bed at 12, falling straight to sleep. My dad goes to bed at 1, so it wasn't long after that he went to bed. I woke up to sudden shouting, and at the time I thought it was my parents, as they weren't at a civil stage in the divorce. This would be a normal event, so I left it and tried to go back to sleep. I listened closer and heard 2 male voices. I was confused, so I went to check it out. I got to the top of my stairs and saw my dad and a random man who was shouting in a different language at my dad. My dad was telling him to leave, until the man said my name and started walking up the stairs towards me. I burst into tears and started frantically crying in confusion. My dad quickly ran up the stairs to stop the man from getting closer and brought him down forcefully. I was angry and ran down to throw an iPad and kick him, but at age 12, it wouldn't have done much damage. My dad told me to run as the man grabbed my dad's neck and my dad pinned him against the wall. I grabbed a glass flower pot and motioned it towards the man's head until my dad shouted stop. I was so scared. I ran out of the house to my friendly neighbor and told him the situation. He didn't hesitate to go to my house, and he called the police. At this point, I was at my neighbor's house and was very on edge. The man refused to get in the police car and was nearly tasered as he was shouting mine, my dad's, and my mom's name. We were all scared and confused. I couldn't stay in that house, so I stayed at my cousin's for the night. In the morning I was worried, and finally found out the whole story. When I heard the story, I dropped to the floor in tears. Apparently, the man was dating my mom, and my mom told him that my dad was abusive, which is not true. No one knows how he got in, but it was freaky and strange. My dad and I think my mom gave him a key. My mom went on several dates with him until she ended it. He must have been worried and came to our house. In the end, he was arrested and put on house probation for 6 months. The other day, I found out something horrific that will haunt me forever. The man had been arrested for murder only 1 year later. I'm grateful to know that it wasn't me or my dad. In 2011, I moved into a new home with my teenage son. The area we moved into was a well-populated suburb that is zoned as an industrial area due to a large amount of factories and wholesalers located there. Our new place was part of a small group of single-story units on a very quiet street behind most of the industrial buildings, with 2 large, separate parks. One about a minute walk down the road, and the other was directly across the road. That one was a large open field, but bordered all the way around by a couple of rows of very tall gum trees. There are streetlights here and there, but overall lighting is sparse, so I don't like walking down the street at night, especially across from the park. I'm female, and by that time had sadly been confronted with more than enough creepy situations to be able to feel comfortable walking past an area where it was easy to hide and ambush someone. Plus, my son had mentioned he heard strange noises coming from the park at night. I've always been a night owl though, and being self-employed, it was rare for me to go to bed before 2 a.m. A couple of months after we moved in, I was working on my computer at about 1 a.m. It was always dead quiet at this time, so when I started to hear a strange low noise coming from outside, I picked up on it immediately. It was faint at first, but it slowly became louder, and I stopped what I was doing, on alert, but not alarmed since it could have been a stray dog or cat. As I listened, the sound grew much louder until it was directly outside of my window. I had never heard anything like this in my life. It was a deep and guttural growling, almost monstrous, and my heart began to pound in fear. It was truly both disturbing and frightening. The unit I was in had very little in the way of real home security. Flimsy screens over the windows, and an old wooden door, which locked, but anyone determined to get in would likely be able to bust through it with enough weight and force. Even though there were 6 other units, each with occupants, I didn't really feel safe from whatever was outside. I couldn't bring myself to look out there though, as the only way I could open the blind is by lifting the blinds, which would either call attention to myself or mean I'd see something I couldn't handle. When I'm truly petrified, I often freeze, and am not much good for anything. As I sat there already in a half-frozen state, just listening and trying to quell my imagination, which was being fueled by both fear and growing panic, I started to make out garbled words in the growling. I heard a low, raspy, and strained, "Help me," which to my ears sounded both demonic and human. That was it for me. Either some drunk idiot was playing a sick game trying to scare me, or a crazed lunatic was attempting to lure me out. There was still no way in hell I was going to check outside, so I grabbed my phone, called the police, and paced the house as I spoke to the operator. I told them there was a prowler outside my window making creepy growling noises. They said they'd send someone to check it out, and the call ended. I went to the back of the unit and woke my son up, explained what was happening, and asked him to wait up with me until the police got there. But he didn't seem to think there was any immediate danger, and while he remained half awake, he didn't get up. I went back to the lounge and waited, listening for any sound, but it seemed to be quiet. Around 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door, and a man said, "Police!" I didn't have a peephole or any way to check who was outside, so I had no choice but to open the door, which I did cautiously. I was relieved to see 2 officers there, and I told them about what I had heard. I then waited by the door as they explored the surrounding area with torches. Several minutes passed by, and they found nothing. I asked them if they had received any other reports from the area, as the noises had been quite loud, but they said they hadn't. It was now closer to 2 a.m. With the police gone, and all being quiet, I didn't have much to do except to go to bed and try to sleep, but my mind was still racing. Gradually, I calmed and began to fall asleep, only to snap back with a sudden thought. I got up, switched my computer back on, and looked something up online. I found a YouTube video in the results, so I clicked play. The sounds that I had been hearing earlier immediately returned, only this time, it was quietly emanating from my speakers, and I realized what I had just done. I called the cops on a horny koala. What makes this worse is that the reason I had thought to look up what kinds of sounds they make was because I saw one in the furthest park a couple of weeks prior. I can't even use the excuse that koalas weren't expected in an industrial suburban area. In my meager defense, I had never heard a koala's mating sound before, despite living in the actual country for a few years. I can only think that me hearing, "Help me," within the sounds, was my mind playing tricks on me in my increasingly fearful state. I've heard them several times since over the years, as I still live in the same place. Only now instead of getting scared and calling the cops, I have that futile kind of reaction old folks do. You know, the fist shaking, "Get off my yard, you damn kids!" one. This takes place over the span of a few months and is still ongoing. I'm 16 and my family and I moved into our new house in rural Kentucky about a year ago. There aren't many houses near ours, just a forest surrounding us and a few fields. I have 2 small dogs, relevant later in the story, which I walk every day. I started walking the dogs around the forest, just trying to get to know the new terrain and become familiar with my new surroundings. One day while I was walking my dogs, I stumbled upon an abandoned shed-looking building in the middle of the field. Above the field was a gravel road that maybe 1 car per week would drive on, basically desolate. On the other side, it was vast fields, then trees for miles. I'd love to explore new places, so I decided I would go check out this building, because why not? As I came upon the building, I saw some graffiti on the side reading, "Sleep," and "Eat more Soylent Green." What the hell does that mean? It was interesting, but didn't put me off as it was fading and looked like it was from years ago. I came to the building and walked in the main room, which looked like it had previously been a garage for a lawnmower or something. It wasn't very big, a small room size, and had an entrance where a sliding glass door should have been, but it was just open, no door. There was nothing in there but a few bugs. I walked around the back, and there were 2 closet-sized rooms side by side, able to fit about 1 person in them. In these rooms I found smashed beer bottles, deodorant, and various trash. It looked pretty new, like someone had been there recently. I was kinda shocked since it was so desolate, but I didn't think much of it. As I began to leave, I hear a car pull up on the gravel road above me and stop. It was a black Jeep, older and pretty beat up. It stopped and sat there for a few minutes as I walked away. That was strange. Why did it just stop? And how odd it is that a car would be driving down such a remote road right as I'm next to it. I didn't pay it too much mind, and decided I'd still walk my dogs there. A week passes by, and I'd completely forgotten about the car, and I kept walking my dogs next to the buildings. One day after school, I took my dogs to the building, and as I walked into the big room, I saw a smashed garden gnome.